Hey there guys, so with the release of Deadpool Wolverine, it was time to go back and rank all the X-Men films and rank them from worst to best. At last place is New Mutants, and I know this came out of an awkward time during COVID and Disney acquiring Fox, and that's why they couldn't go back to reshoots, but if you put that to a side, the studio clearly didn't give a shit about this movie. But aside from having a talented cast, it's still a dull mess of a movie with some half-arsed horror elements. Even the film didn't know what it wanted to be, and it doesn't really tie all that much to the X-Men universe, besides from using some footage from Logan, which I found quite lazy. At number 13 is X-Men The Last Stand. Not only did this film kill the momentum for the first two films, but also killed the momentum for the later installments. Clearly, Brett Ratner wasn't the right director for this. For an hour and 45-minute movie, it tackles three big plots, and for that it suffers for it. You got Magneto and the Brotherhood, you got The Cure, you also got Jean Grey dealing with Phoenix, and to me the Dark Phoenix saga is one of the greatest comic book storylines of all time, but in this it feels so tacked on. Professor X and Cyclops gets killed off, and James Madison did have scheduling conflicts, but it just feels so shrugged off, let's move on, and Angel had no business being in this movie, but I do love the addition of Kelsey Grammer as Beast. When it comes down to its action, it's enjoyable, but the film lacks style and scope, and it's poorly edited. It does have some really cool moments like Magneto moving the bridge because it shows off how powerful he is. At number 12 is X-Men Dark Phoenix. Now I used to think this was the worst X-Men movie, but at least they focus more on the Dark Phoenix saga storyline this time, even though this film doesn't do it justice. This film went through rewrites, reshoots, this film wanted to be a two-parter, and it was still a hot mess of a movie. There's characters in this that feel so out of character, like Professor X. He's an arsehole for most of the time, and there's some characters are in this are just so bland, like Michael Fassbender is the least interesting we've seen as Magneto. Jennifer Lawrence clearly didn't want to be in this film, so that's why they killed her off so early with her half-assed makeup. This film clearly wanted to use the Skrulls but couldn't because Captain Marvel was using them, so they went for bland alien shapeshifters lurking around. And for a film that's meant to take place in the 90s, it doesn't feel like it, and clearly the characters don't age at all. And the things that really annoyed me about this movie are the stuff that was set up in X-Men Apocalypse, like the relationship between Magneto and Quicksilver. Quicksilver gets written out for most of the time, and it was a crime that this film didn't have another iconic Quicksilver scene like in the last two films. And those comic book accurate costumes that we got at the end of X-Men Apocalypse, instead, they went for these horrible matching pajamas. At number 11 is X-Men Origins Wolverine. To me, this falls into the category of guilty pleasures. I mean, this is a bad movie, but there's stuff in this I really like, considering this went through a writer's strike, and the way the film opens up with Wolverine and Sabretooth, brothers at arms, going through these war events, it's just awesome. I think Levi Stryber is great as Sabretooth, but I also like Danny Hudson as William Stryker. But we really didn't need a origin story of Wolverine, considering we have X-Men 2, which explained it really well, and the rest of the characters in this movie aren't really utilised all that much. I mean, we didn't need a young Cyclops or a CGI Charles Xavier. At number 10 is X-Men Apocalypse. Now, to me, this was my most anticipated film of 2016. I was so hyped up for this one. Bryan Singer was coming back to direct. We're going to get Apocalypse, who is basically the Thanos of the X-Men franchise. And I was reading all of the Age of Apocalypse comics leading up to this. But this turned out to be one of the most disappointing films of my life. I mean, considering you have a great actor, Oscar Isaac, playing Apocalypse, somehow he's boring and flat. This film had no business being a 2 hour and 30-minute movie. I mean, the William Stryker kidnapping the X-Men didn't really do anything. It had no business in this. I mean, it's got nothing to do with the Apocalypse storyline. It didn't really go anywhere. Wolverine cameo was pointless. Clearly, you could tell Jennifer Lawrence didn't want to be in this franchise for much longer. And for a disappointing movie, it does have some great elements to it, like the Quicksilver scene. I mean, that was easily the best scene in that movie, and I wish they continue on in the next installment. I think Michael Fassbender has some great material to work with, and I like the new cast playing these young versions of these iconic X-Men. I mean, like I said, yes, it's a very disappointing movie, but at the end of the day, it's okay and watchable. At number 9 is The Wolverine. For the most part, this is a good movie, and in some ways I look at this as the prototype of Logan. I mean, it's a great character study on Wolverine after the events of The Last Stand. James Mangold does a great job of giving the film but also Wolverine that lone samurai vibe, and this film takes place in Japan, which was a nice change of scenery, but we can all agree that it loses the momentum on the third act. I mean, it kind of loses that grounded tone with the whole robot silver samurai, which feels so cartoonish and leaves the film on a bad note. And number 8 is the one that started all X-Men. Is it the one that started the comic book genre? Yes. Is it dated? Also yes. But I loved it how they take a popular comic book franchise about regular people having powers in a world that people hate and fear them, along with the fact you have characters that are cartoonish and campy, but they put them in a modern society, but also takes the world and the characters seriously, along with the fact you have some fantastic casting, whether it's Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, Patrick Stewart as Professor X, Ian McKellen as Magneto. The only thing I would say is about the whole plot about Magneto having a device that makes people into mutants feels kind of dated and cartoonish. And number 7 is Deadpool 2. This is a wildly entertaining movie, but I do think it's overstuffed. I mean, they throw everything at this movie, like Vanessa's death, Cable going back in time, the X-Men, the X-Force, this kid and this evil school. There's even Escape from Prison storyline thrown in there. You even have the Juggernaut. But I'm glad we get to see more of Deadpool, and I like the new characters like Cable and Domino, even Peter. I just think the other 6 films on this list have a much more fleshed out story rather than having all these plots stacked on top of each other. And number 6 is Logan. I'm going to get so much hate for this. I know everyone else will put it at number 1. If you want to put your dislike buttons, come at me, bro. And I will say Logan is the best made film on this list. Easily has Hugh Jackman's best performance as Wolverine, and Patrick Stewart should have got an Oscar nomination. I just find that the other 5 films on this list to be more enjoyable to me. But this film has a rich narrative about death, regret and redemption. This is a very personal story that isn't trying to be complex compared to other comic book movies that we have today. At number 5 is the latest edition, Deadpool and Wolverine. This is such a fun movie. Yes, the narrative is straightforward and it's not as big as I wanted it to be, and I was hoping to see more X-Men. Apart from that, this movie is everything that I want from a comic book movie. Crowd-pleasing cameos, Hugh Jackman finally wearing the yellow suit. This film is just filled with awesome moments like the opening with NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye. I mean, you could tell Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman were having so much fun with this. This was a love letter to the Fox universe. And number 4 is X-Men Days of Future Past, the Terminator of the X-Men movies. Bryan Singer returns to this franchise and gave us the perfect combination of the first 2 X-Men movies along with First Class. In a world where you have multiverse and cameos, this film did it first, but also had a better explanation for it and a better reason why they were doing this. I mean, this film is filled with standout scenes like the Quicksilver scenes, but each character, whether it's big or small, had their own time to shine. Days of Future Past is not only a really cool time travel movie, but it's a great send-off to that original era of X-Men movies. At number 3 is Deadpool. This one has grown on me over the past 8 years. This one took the comic book genre, turned it around, and went for an oddball direction that no other comic book film has done before. I mean, it's a very straightforward story, but it has that simplistic charm to it, like a guy falls in love but then gets ill but does something extreme but then goes on revenge. And because of the whole fourth wall breaking and the way the story is told, it does have that complexity to it. And because this was a time where every comic book movie has to be big, this one had a much smaller budget and it had a much smaller scale story, and because of it, it was a nice change of pace. At my runners-up is X-Men First Class. This one reinvigorated the X-Men franchise. How do you do an X-Men movie without Wolverine, nor Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart? First Class found a way. It takes these characters and puts them in a 1960s period piece. And because of it, it feels new and serious. And considering this film has lesser known X-Men characters, you don't need to be an X-Men fan to enjoy this movie. But at its core, this film is a great character study on a young Professor X and a Magneto who have different upbringings but become friends later on. But because of their differences on humans, they eventually become enemies but still respect one another. James McAvoy is great as the young Professor X. Jennifer Lawrence adds new layers to Mystique. But this film made me fall in love with Michael Fassbender. Every scene that he's in, he steals it. Whether he's killing Nazis, or rediscovering memories of his mum, or agreeing with Sebastian Shaw but still gonna kill him because he killed his mum. So my favourite is X2 X-Men United. I've always enjoyed this one ever since I was a kid. This was one of my go-to movies. I would watch this multiple times on DVD, but it took everything that worked in the first movie and expands on it. And I didn't realise this movie was based on a popular comic book storyline known as God Loves, Man's Kills. And compared to most films on this list, where it's mutants versus mutants, this time around it was both teams versus the humans. And we definitely explore more of the themes of outcast, fear and hate in a world where they're sworn to protect. And it definitely expands on the characters, the lore and the visuals. The threat is massive, the stakes have never been so high, and we dive much more into Wolverine's past, which after this we didn't need a Wolverine Origins movie. And I love the new additions, whether it's Colossus, Pyro, Alan Cummings, Nightcrawler, which was a crime he never returned. And the film is just filled with awesome moments like the opening scene with Nightcrawler in the White House, Wolverine going berserk in the mansion. One of my particular favourite scenes is where Magneto confronts Pyro and he tells him that he's more than this. To me, X2 X-Men United is truly, today's standards, one of the most underrated comic book movies, and I would defend this movie. I do think it's still the best X-Men movie, even though this film is like 20 years old. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Go like, share and subscribe. Let me know where would you rank all the X-Men films. Go check out my Facebook, my Twitter and my Instagram page. You guys are awesome. I got your back.